21. Izuku felt the sweat bead on his forehead, intermingling with the blood that was drying on his face. The cuts really did sting, but he had to concentrate. This moment was crucial. I need another card. You can't just disintegrate the cards you don't like, Magna complained. No one said that was a rule, Shigaraki said petulantly. But I do need another card. With a sigh, Kurogiri handed another card to Shigaraki before feeding Toga another bite of sushi. She had been chained up in Izuku's place after she had rushed him with her knife, decorating him with a wound that was still bleeding profusely, despite Kurogiri's best efforts. Izuku was fairly sure it would need stitches, but for now he had to make do with the butterfly bandages they had on hand. Remember, if we win this hand you stay with us forever, Toga said, eyes hyper-fixated on the blood still framing Izuku's face. I never actually agreed to that, but let's see what you've got, Izuku said. He watched intently as they each laid down their hand before breathing a sigh of relief. Thank goodness you're all terrible at poker. I've got a royal flush. That's no fair. Twice whined, pointing at Izuku. Teach me your ways. How is an upstanding teenager like yourself so familiar with poker? Mr. Compress asked. We play it at the police station on break. You have to get good at it, or you'll be cleaning toilets for weeks. The police officers are ruthless, Izuku explained. Spinner was clearly thinking deeply. From what you tell us, it appears that your police officers stand up to Stain's heroic ideals, yet they are scorned by the public. Interesting. Can you turn this way a little bit, Izuku? I can't see the dried blood very well since you moved, Toga asked. A wide grin spread across her face even though she was still chained to the board. But now that we're lovers, can I give you a nickname? No, everyone else in the room said in perfect sync, and twice added, but you can call me whatever you want, babe. So since I won, what do I get? Izuku asked, mainly to break the silence. What would you want? Kurogiri asked. Information? When he saw the uneasy looks the league members traded, he backpedaled. Not about your plans or anything. I can't know very much about your organization or the detective will know I'm not telling the whole truth. I just like analyzing quirks, and you all have interesting abilities. Why not? Shigaraki mused. We still have an hour before we agree to leave. Does anyone have a pen and paper? In a different part of the city, Naomasa had a veritable army assembled and they were coming up with a plan. So we bust down the walls and grab the kid, Death Arms shrugged. They haven't sent any kind of ransom, and it's not like a quirkless kid would be worth anything else to them. You make a point, Tsukauchi said, feeling his ulcer in full force. It's an incorrect point, but if that's the case, then your services won't be needed. Thank you for your time. I just meant. There is a missing child. He's probably scared and hurt, and he deserves just as much diligence and respect as anyone else in his position does, Tsukauchi said sharply. Midoriya Izuku has people who love and worry for him. If anyone else has any issues or they would like to make light of this situation because the victim is quirkless, now is the time to leave. Silence stretched over the room and Tsukauchi took a deep breath. Good. Now we have two different locations we're going to strike. The main object of this is to recover Midoriya and Ragdoll, but we can also use this as an opportunity to strike at the League of Villains. Very soon a plan began to unfold. They had almost no information on Tay location from the tracker that had been planted on the Nomu. They were gathering what they could, but the student who had created the tracker had only recently woken up and informed them of its existence. The other location, however, seemed much more important. A while ago Sansa had received a report of a suspicious individual walking into the bar outside of business hours, an individual whose physical description matched that of a man who had definitely been at the camp. It was simple. Normally, they would have waited for the cover of nightfall, but there was an urgency Naomasa didn't quite understand. He reasoned that the villains would be least expecting them to strike now. Just in case, though, they had to have enough manpower to handle a full-out war. We're going to concentrate our heavy hitters where the majority of our villains are going to be. All Might, Endeavor, Edshot and Kamui Woods are going with me, along with a third of the assembled police officers. The rest of the heroes will go to the second location with another third of the police force. The remaining police will see to the safety of surrounding citizens, setting up barricades and evacuating people as necessary. There were a few questions, but Tsukauchi answered them quickly, dissuading others by saying, "You've all been broken into squads. Squad leaders will have in-depth information on your specific roles. We move out the second we're prepared." A new hero who went by Freeze Point snorted. Death Arms was right. We're going through all of this effort to save an old, washed-up hero and a quirkless kid who won't contribute anything to society? No one heard him except the hero standing next to him, who snickered in a particular pair of police officers who happened to be passing by. Saito opened her mouth to scream at the heroes, but Sasaki's wings snapped open, clipping Freeze Point in the back of the head. "Sorry, it felt a little drafty," Sasaki said with absolutely zero remorse or even emotion in her voice. "Aren't you both so worried for the missing kid? I hear he saved some of the hero students' lives. And even if he hadn't, he still has people who care about him. And we're also women in a largely male field, so we've heard everything you're saying about Ragdoll before. It's really a testament to what a great hero she is. So maybe you two should stop gossiping like old women and actually do your job." The frigid look in Sasak's eyes would have put Kondo to shame, and Saito had never been more proud. Little Midoriya had made quite the impact on all of them, and everyone from their station would doubtlessly fight tooth and nail to retrieve him, except maybe Mori. His willingness to contribute to the cause remained to be seen. Toshinori didn't know very much about this quirkless child, but Naomasa cared deeply about him, so he would do whatever he could to bring this Midoriya home safely. He'd also heard that this child had saved a few of his students at the training camp. If that was true, Toshinori would have to commend the boy, perhaps give him an autograph. He felt the slightest bit nervous when it was time to move out, but that was absurd. He was the symbol of peace, this was what he did. All Might strode forward, heedless of who noticed him. By the time the League saw them, it would be too late to do anything, and the heroes would once more prevail. As was the plan, Edshot and a number of police officers went to the door while All Might went to the back. He waited for his cue. He was rather proud of it too. He'd assisted in coming up with this particular portion of the plan. When he heard the telltale knock and call of pizza delivery, all that was heard from inside was the faint rustle of chains. At least, that was all that was heard before All Might punched the wall in, bellowing a mighty smash. The dust cleared, and All Might found himself alone in a room with a kid who was chained to some board-like structure. He was in rough shape with bruises forming under the dried blood on his face. "Never fear, citizen, because I am here," All Might dramatically declared. "Now point me to the dastardly villains who have mistreated you so, I shall make them pay." "What about Ragdoll?" the boy asked desperately. He had shrunk into himself, so All Might couldn't see the boy's face very clearly. "Have you found Ragdoll yet? Is she safe?" The front door opened and Edshot calmly walked in. "We've checked everywhere, All Might. The villains are nowhere to be found. We'll take care of things over here, you go see if they need assistance at the other location." All Might nodded, and in one might bound he was gone, out of sight. Izuku felt his heartbeat return to normal, but he twisted and looked at Edshot. "Is Ragdoll okay? Have you found her?" Edshot carefully unwound the chains around the kid. "We haven't retrieved her as of yet, but I promise we've got our best people on the job." "Sorry about that. All Might has good intentions, he just isn't the most gentle man by nature." Izuku felt like he could attest to that. Just seeing All Might had brought back the memory of their first encounter in excruciating, throbbing detail. His body was also throbbing from the rubble that had hit him during the #1 hero's grand entrance, but his heart hurt more. Did All Might recognize him? He was so caught in his mind that he couldn't even ask for Edshot's autograph, who was potentially one of the coolest heroes to exist. Anxiety compounded with lack of sleep, and even more anxiety muddled his mind. He wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. It was now that he was safe and the villains were gone, that he was completely falling apart. Someone was yelling, and there was too much motion and noise, and All Might saw him. All Might would reprimand him again for getting caught, and this dream would die to end. A pair of arms slipped around Izuku, and someone was holding him tight, murmuring, "We have you, little Midoriya. You're safe now." Hearing the words, "little Midoriya," made Izuku feel like he could breathe again. His own arms snaked around Officer Saito, even as she said into her radio, "We've got little Midoriya. He's safe now." He wasn't quite sure how it all happened, but Izuku was ushered into an ambulance, and then into a hospital, an army of police officers following. He gave statements and answered questions for what seemed like an eternity. He vaguely registered some of the things that he was told, like the fact that he was in the same hospital the UA students who were injured were sent to. Other things would have to be told to him again, but any number of people would be happy to do so. It was getting harder and harder for Izuku to concentrate on any one thing until the door opened and a woman with familiar green eyes walked in, twisting her hands together nervously. "Mom." Izuku sobbed as he bolted out of bed and rushed forward to her, despite the protests of the nearby nurse. They hugged each other fiercely, both crying more than should be strictly physically possible. Mother and son stood there for a few moments, simply knowing that the other was there, safe and alive. Inko pulled away, even though it was the last thing she wanted to do. "You need to get back into bed, just like the nurse says. I want them to make sure you're okay." She ran her fingers through his hair, briefly brushing the newly stitched cut on his forehead. "Does it hurt?" "Not really. It only needed stitches because it was on my head, and they numbed me well," Izuku said, clambering back into the hospital bed. "I was so worried, Izuku," Inko said, her hand finding his. "I don't know what I would do without you. I'm so glad you're safe." They both looked up when knocks sounded at the door. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Izuku smiled, sitting up a little straighter. "Detective Tsukauchi. You're here." Sure enough, it was the detective, his clothes as equally rumpled as he was. "Hello, Midoriyas. It's wonderful seeing you both safe. Why don't you join us, detective? I can get you tea." "Don't worry yourself, Mrs. Midoriya. I needed to see that Izuku was safe firsthand." Naomasa passed a hand over his face, breathing in deeply. "I also have some important things to discuss with both of you." "This sounds serious," Inko said, straightening in her chair. "I would have waited to have this conversation, but I was told to address this as soon as possible." "We need to discuss the provisional police program," Tsukauchi said, taking a deep breath. "The police force is considering shutting it down." "No." Izuku protested. "Just hear me out, little Midoriya. We still think you're one of the most promising candidates we've ever had, but we put your safety first. You've already been involved in more serious incidents than most rookies see in their first year, and you haven't even finished the academy yet. I think that this could still be good for you, and for the public perception of the police, but we won't continue without your express permission. It comes down to what you say, Mrs. Midoriya." "But wait, it wasn't." "Hush, little Midoriya, let her think. If we do shut down the program, there's nothing stopping you from joining us once you're an adult." Izuku turned to his mother, eyes pleading. In a trembling voice, Inko said, "I want nothing more than to tell you to shut it all down and have my baby safe for at least a few more years. But I can't." The boy and detective watched Inko intently, hanging off her every word. "I was terrified when you told me that Izuku was gone, absolutely terrified. I didn't know how I would survive without him if anything happened. But that's exactly how Kirami's mother felt, and Kota's aunt, or so I'm told. I know how that hero student's mother felt, learning that her son could have died at the hands of Stain. Izuku gave those parents the same relief that you gave me today, detective, and for that I thank you. Tsukauchi was struck speechless watching this heroic mother, but now Inko was crying in earnest. I just can't take this away from Izuku. He's already had one dream taken away from him, and I had a hand in that. Being told he couldn't be a hero nearly destroyed my boy, and I can never forgive myself for that. So really, thank you, Detective Tsukauchi. You brought my son a purpose again, and you brought him back to me. Apparently tears were contagious, because Naomas's eyes felt suspiciously wet at the moment. He managed to hold out, but the Midoriya cry fest was only interrupted by Inko's cell phone. She jumped at the sound before excusing herself from the room, leaving Izuku and Tsukauchi alone. The detective sighed. Words cannot describe how happy I am that your mother is allowing us to continue. That also means I'm still your superior, so I'm allowed to ask, what on earth did you think you were doing? How did you think that trading yourself to the League of Villains was an acceptable strategy? I'm sorry. It was the only thing I could think of, Dad. Izuku cut off, his cheeks blooming bright red as he realized what he'd said. I'm sorry. Don't worry about it, Tsukauchi said, his cheeks equally red. But Saito can never hear of this. In the hallway, one Todoroki Shoto cocked his head at what he had accidentally overheard. He had been dragged to the hospital to visit his injured classmates. On his way to the bathroom, he had gotten horribly lost, but he happened to stumble across Midoriya. He was pleased to find that the boy wasn't dead, and he resolved to pass the information along to his classmates. However, there was one fact that Shoto was keeping to himself. He'd already had his suspicions, but this confirmed it. Midoriya was the detective's secret love child. Excerpts from Izuku's analysis. Name: Kondo Tsubaki. Age: 36. Height: 178 centimeters, 5 feet 10. Occupation: police officer, partners with Sasaki. Physical description: average height, slender build, long, straight black hair. Kondo's most striking feature is her eyes. They're ice blue, and she is known to stop criminals with a single look. People who are subject to her gaze are reportedly frozen in place due to the weight of her eyes. It's not her quirk. Kondo is just a terrifying individual when she chooses to be. Personality: Kondo is coldly analytical, especially when on a case. She seems sharp and intimidating at first, and sometimes more so once you get to know her. Kondo expects a lot of people that she respects, but earning her approval will keep someone happy for weeks. However, when she is disappointed in you, the look will haunt you for even longer. Quirk: blade arms. Kondo rarely uses her quirk, but it has the ability to harden and sharpen her arms along the side of her forearm. She claims it's not a very useful quirk, despite my objections and attempts to convince her otherwise. Notes: she always seems reluctant to play poker at the station, but it's all a ruse. If you actually fall for her show of disapproval, before you know it you'll be stuck with Kondo's cleaning duties for weeks. Chapter 22. Izuku, Detective Tsukauchi just got here. Inko called up the stairs. He popped his head out the door in surprise. Really? Why is the detective here? I thought I was still grounded. He says that he needs you to fill something out at the station, Inko said. I also need to come in case there's any parental permission issues, so put on your pants and come on. After the incidents at the training camp, Izuku had been strictly forced to relax. All of the adults in his life had banded together, removing any and all things in his life that seemed like work. He wasn't allowed anywhere near a police station, Valiant's training hall, or anything that could be misconstrued as analyzing a quirk. It was torture. It had been all of 3 days and Izuku felt like he was going insane. He had done all of the laundry, washed all of the dishes, broken a few dishes. There just wasn't enough to occupy him, and all of his attempts to do anything else were quickly thwarted. This meant that he jumped at the chance to go to the police station, He missed the officers and the sense of community that came with them. Even if he spent the entire time filling out paperwork, or heck, even scrubbing toilets, Izuku wasn't going to waste the chance. Detective Tsukauchi was waiting in their living room when Izuku came spilling out of his room and down the stairs. He smiled at the sight, dipping his head. "Midoriya, you're looking eager." "He's been a bit twitchy the past 48 hours, Inko confided. "I caught him chanting the various quirk classes and subclasses to himself in his sleep." "Mom." Izuku whined, feeling his cheeks flush. "I'm sure the detective doesn't want to hear about that. Let's just go." "Lil Midoriya is right. We're on a tight schedule today," Tsukauchi said, opening the door. "After you, Mrs. Midoriya." The drive over to the station was short, but pleasant. Tsukauchi was happy to hear about what Izuku had been doing in his free time, much of which had been dedicated to assuring Inko that the cut through his eyebrow did not need to be rebandaged or seen by a doctor again. When he wasn't washing dishes and doing laundry, that was. He briefly noticed the unusual number of cars outside the police station, but before he could comment on them, Izuku was ushered inside. Mori was sulking at the front desk, probably taking over for Sansa after losing the last round of poker. When Izuku waved, the man simply looked away, pretending not to see him. As per usual, Mori was the pinnacle of maturity. "We don't want to disrupt the normal flow of the station, so I'll have you take care of this in the back room. Go ahead of me, I'll be there in a moment." "You as well, Mrs. Midoriya." The mother and son made their way to the room, Izuku practically bouncing in excitement. Maybe he could get his hands on a case file or two to solve. He found himself opening the door of the dark room with a sort of reverence, nearly falling over when he was greeted with a deafening shout. Surprise! A light flicked on, and the sheer mass of people inside was a bit overwhelming. They were all people he knew, and they were all people he loved. All of the police officers aside from Mori were there, radios ready lest a call come in, but they were there. Mixed among them were police officers from other stations, Kimiko and her mother, a variety of pro-heroes, and a scattering of students his age. He barely registered Shinso sliding his sunglasses over his eyes, mouthing, "Too bright." Along with the people, the room was packed with decorations, with tattered paper streamers stretching across the ceiling, along with birthday balloons, get well soon balloons, and even a few hero balloons. "What's going on?" Izuku squeaked, already dangerously close to tears. Tsukauchi wormed his way in until finally the crowd parted, allowing him to stand next to none other than Tsuragame. The police chief was standing as straight as ever, but his mouth was turned up in as much of a smile as his physiology would allow. "Midoriya Izuku, I'm proud to announce that you are a pup no longer. As representative of Japan's police force, I welcome you as our newest official member." Izuku made a strangled noise, which the police chief politely ignored. "I have no doubt in my mind that you will become one of the finest police officers that this country has ever seen. You have already consistently put your life on the line to protect this nation's citizens. However, I do feel the need to remind you that it is not a requirement to get injured on every case we work with. In fact, we discourage it if possible." Tsuragame paused to let the laughter die down before continuing. "This police station in particular holds some of the finest role models and examples to you for your future. Look to them. Learn from them as you consistently change the world for the better. Midoriya Izuku, I offer my sincerest congratulations as I present to you your police badge." As he spoke, he withdrew a badge from his coat, carefully depositing it into Izuku's hands. Izuku had held out valiantly, but at the sight and weight of the badge, Izuku promptly burst into tears joining Inko, who had been crying since everyone had yelled, "Surprise!" Sansa looked surprised, leaning over to Tsukauchi. "I can't believe Tsuragame made it through the only speech without any real dog puns." "Thank you," Izuku blubbered. I can't." "Just accept it and be happy, little Midoriya," Saito said, looping an arm around his shoulders. "You've earned it, so celebrate with us." We got you a cake and everything. Through his tears, Izuku glanced over to the card table with food set out. On it rested a store-bought cake, still in its packaging with a discount tag clearly visible. In frosting was written, "Happy Retirement." Defying his physiological limits, Izuku cried even harder. I love it. Thank you all so much, I love it. Amongst the chaos, Ojiro slipped between people until he stood near enough Izuku to press a package of tissues into his hand. This made Inko cry harder, hugging the boy and thanking him for being in Izuku's life. The blonde blushed ever so slightly, his tail wagging almost imperceptibly. Oh, I enjoy it. Midoriya is one of my best friends, and I'm glad he's getting the recognition he deserves. After that, Ojiro had both Midoriyas clutching him as they sobbed violently. He remained uneasily like that until Nakamura extricated him, fearful of the hero in training being drowned. Sasaki timidly asked, Why are you crying so hard, Inko? You helped us plan this. I'm just so proud of my baby. I can't believe that he's so grown up. She sobbed. Eventually their tears did stop, and then the party was able to begin in earnest. Izuku tried to make his way through all of the guests, but there were two complications to that plan. As he moved through the room, he was hindered by Kimiko on one leg and Koda on the other. Hey Shinso, thanks for coming, Izuku said casually. Shinso, still wearing his sunglasses, glanced briefly at the children. I thought you and your mom were bright enough. I think I may die from overexposure. But seriously, congratulations Midoriya. You deserve this. It's 'cause he's the best. Kimiko said proudly from his right leg. I do agree. But I should take my leave, I'll see you around, Midoriya, Shinso said, slipping out the door. As Izuku watched his friend leave, Valiant approached him. We need to convince that boy to join the dojo. He's got some real potential, especially after the seeds that Eraserhead planted. One of these days, maybe. I know Shinso would do well, Izuku said with a slight smile. Thank you for coming, Master. Does this mean that I'm allowed to start coming to training again? As long as you promise not to get kidnapped again, the man said sternly, only half joking. I promise I will do everything in my power to avoid getting kidnapped again, Izuku said. That's all I ask. Now if you'll excuse me, I must go speak with Gunhead about his latest technique, Valiant said, strolling away. Get off of Izuku, he's my big brother. Kimiko said, tightening her grip on his leg. He is not your big brother, you're just saying that. And he saved me from a scary villain, so I get to stay. Koda said stubbornly. He saved me first. Izuku leaned down as best he could. Hey guys, I think they're cutting into the cake. When they scrambled away, it almost felt like his legs were too light, and he nearly tipped over on the spot. He stumbled a few steps, righting himself just before he crashed into some distracted guests. Oh. He was standing right in front of the wild pussycats. It made sense that they were there. Someone had to have brought Koda after all. Izuku had simply been mentally blocking out that truth, because he wasn't ready to confront the reality of the whole situation, or Ragdoll, for that matter. The group was significantly more sedated than their normal behavior. They were more quiet, and Ragdoll in particular seemed more withdrawn and so tired. He bowed low once their focus was on him. I am so sorry. I couldn't, while I was held captive. I should have done more to help you, Ragdoll. I could have talked to them, convinced them. I could have saved your quirk, maybe. I'm so sorry. The guilt that had been gnawing at him since he'd learned of the loss of the woman's quirk was even worse now, and Izuku found that he couldn't look her in the eye. He couldn't look any of them in the eye. He'd failed them, and now Ragdoll was suffering. Part of him even considered giving the badge back to Tsuragame, because clearly he wasn't ready for such responsibility. Hey, look at us, kitten, Pixie Bob said, gently raising his chin. You did more for us than you can ever know. We don't blame you. We actually came to thank you, Mandalay interjected, smiling softly. You saved a lot of people, especially Koda. You didn't just save his life, you gave him a purpose again. He won't stop talking about you, you know. One day he's determined to be a police officer just like you. You've got the fighting spirit, Tiger said, slapping Izuku on the back hard enough that he lurched forward a few inches. Make good use of it. Will you three go get us something to eat and drink? Ragdoll asked, her smile so frail. She stared down the other three heroes, a silent understanding passing between them before all but Ragdoll nodded and disappeared, effectively leaving Izuku and Ragdoll alone. I can see the apology coming, but it's not necessary. You couldn't have known that they took me as well, Midoriya. You did all that you could, just like I did. I felt the same way when I learned that they had taken you as well, Ragdoll said. But they took so much from you, Izuku whispered. Yes, my quirk is a large part of my life that I'll miss. But it's not who I am. Humans were perfectly functional before quirks appeared, and you're a living testament that they're not necessary. It's sad, but I'll just have to find a way to save people without a quirk, a lot like you have, Ragdoll said, a ghost of her former enthusiasm lighting up her face. I know you're set on becoming a detective, but for what it's worth, you've got what it takes to be a hero, Midoriya. You've got the heart and passion, and I'm sorry that it took so long for people to realize it. The Pussycats and I will be watching you, and supporting you in whatever you may do. I know it's going to be great. Tears burned Izuku's eyes, but somehow he was able to talk past them. You four have also been an inspiration to me. Thank you, for being heroes that I could look up to when I needed it most. Ragdoll sniffed, close to tears herself. Well, that's just not fair. Now I deserve a hug. He stepped forward, shutting his eyes tight as he embraced the fragile hero. She was warm and comforting, and his heart sang with the knowledge that she supported him. He stood there for a moment, relishing the warmth until someone whined, "No fair, I want to hug the kitten too." Izuku stepped back, cheeks burning as he watched Pixie Bob approaching. Thank you all for coming, I should probably go see. No way, kitten. You hugged Ragdoll, not you have to hug me. It's a rule, Pixie Bob said, reeling him in. We get to hug little Midoriya now? Excellent. An all too familiar voice crowed. Saito materialized, snatching the boy away from Pixie Bob and pulling him in close. Izuku's already red face blazed crimson, as the considerable height difference between him and Saito left his face smothered in her chest. It stayed like this until Inko took pity on her son and extricated him from the police officer's grasp, giving Saito a light scolding. Izuku took the opportunity to escape and watch the party from afar for a few moments. There were a formidable number of people present, and the diversity was astounding. Kimiko was still commanding Koda to do various things while Valiant was discussing the pros and cons of certain techniques with Eraserhead, and Kondo was putting up a fairly good fight against Tiger in an arm wrestling match. You know, when I first met you, I thought, this kid is insane. Who just grabs a kidnapped child and runs from the kidnapper? Izuku started before he realized that it was Detective Tsukauchi who had sidled up next to him. And then you kept coming back, and you kept doing insane things. Before long I knew that if we could keep you alive long enough, you would become the best detective this country has ever seen. This is your day, Midoriya. Let's go enjoy it. Excerpts from Izuku's analysis. Name: Mori Akito. Age: 21. Height: 180 centimeters, 5 feet 11. Occupation: police officer. Physical description: Mori is as close as one can come to looking like a delinquent while still being a police officer. He's got long black hair that he puts in a man bun unless Tsukauchi tells him to take it out, and black eyes to match. He also insists on keeping his mustache, but Saito frequently claims that it looks like he taped a comb to his upper lip. He's on the tall side, but not comparable to the likes of Saito or Soma, and he's more lean than muscular. Personality. Mori is sullen. He feels the need to be the center of attention, and the need to be the best. He can tend to treat his cases with some levity, but when the case involves children in any degree, he is a completely different officer. He can be irresponsible and a bit conceited, but I'm sure there's a side to him that I haven't seen yet. Maybe one day he won't hate me anymore. Quirk. Megaphone. Mori's quirk operates as a less powerful version of present Mike's quirk. He can't do much in the way of directing his voice, and he doesn't have very much skill in terms of controlling or moderating his voice, but it is useful when trying to make announcements at the station or on a crime scene. Notes. Mori graduated from the police academy at the top of his class, and he was put with Tsukauchi's station specifically because he has potential, but he needs to see past himself to unleash it. If we're viewing the station as a family, Mori is the sulky teenage son. Chapter 23. Monday morning dawned, and Izuku hadn't slept a wink. Just the knowledge that he was going to start the next day as an actual police officer was enough to keep him staring at the ceiling, hoping it wasn't all a dream. But the dryness in his eyes was a testament to reality. The excitement would wear off one day and he would be able to sleep again. Eventually. Probably. Maybe he needed to go see Recovery Girl. Anyway, now it was at least a socially acceptable time to be awake, barely. Hoping to take care of some of his nerves, Izuku went for an extra long run that morning. He may have looped around the police station a few times, but no one would be able to prove a thing. But he was back in plenty of time to shower. At that point, Izuku couldn't resist any longer. Once the party was over, Tsukauchi had handed a uniform, which he hadn't allowed himself to try on until this very moment. Putting it on was almost a spiritual experience, carefully buttoning the freshly pressed shirt. Somehow his red sneakers even worked with the whole ensemble. He was still an hour early when he came downstairs. Regardless, his mother was waiting with a warm breakfast. The second she saw him in his uniform, she promptly burst into tears. This led to Izuku bursting into tears as well as the two clutched one another. "I'm so proud of you, Izuku," Inko sobbed. "You've grown up to be such a great man, and I can't believe you're already all grown up." "I love you, Mom," Izuku said through his own tears. "Thank you for supporting me." Inko sniffed, finally pulling away. "The food is going to get cold." Nodding, Izuku sat down, picking up his chopsticks. It was a nice meal, relatively tearless, and as always, delicious. But soon enough, they both had to leave for work, something that thrilled Izuku. Inko offered to drive him to the police station, but he declined. He knew he needed to have some alone time to sort out his thoughts before he got there. As he made his way to the station, he couldn't help but recall the first time he had set foot in the place, Kimiko in tow and a madman on his tail. It had been an awakening for him. He was still able to help people, just like he'd always dreamed of. Apparently Kimiko and Koda had a playdate next week. Sasaki had started referring to them as the littlest Midoriyas, and Izuku couldn't find it in him to protest. "Excuse me, young man, just what do you think you're doing?" A stern voice demanded, cutting through the silence. Izuku startled before turning to face the intimidating suited man. He looked familiar for some reason, but Izuku couldn't quite place him. "Can I help you, sir?" He was a tall, daunting figure with everything from his hair to his shoelaces immaculately in place. The eyes behind his glasses were completely unimpressed as he surveyed Izuku. "This look of yours could almost be comical if it weren't illegal." It was beginning to bother Izuku how familiar the man looked, but at the moment he was too, well, he couldn't quite put a name to the emotions running through him. Regardless, they kept him from identifying the man. "There must be some kind of misunderstanding, sir. I'm an officer at the nearest police station. I'm actually headed to work right now. If that's all you need, I wish you a good deed." A thin hand snaked forward, clasping Izuku's shirt collar in an iron grasp. This was hardly amusing at the start of your charade, but now it's a serious breach of the law. Come with me, young man. You are going to understand the gravity of your actions by the end of the day. Fighting to get the man to let go, Izuku snapped. I appreciate your dedication to preserving the sanctity of being a police officer, but at the very least you could let me go. I'm on my way to the police station. Here is my badge, because I am an officer. His eyes flicked down to the proffered badge, still completely unimpressed. The man let go of the shirt collar, only to clasp Izuku's forearm in a death grip. I'm assuming you have some kind of illusionary quirk. Luckily for me, I was headed to the police station as we speak, so we can kill two birds with one stone. Once we're done, I doubt you'll ever impersonate someone in a position of authority again. The stranger was too tall, and he kept his stride long and quick, which meant that Izuku couldn't effectively keep up, instead stumbling behind the man while his face burned in embarrassment. The rest of the walk to the station felt even longer than normal, and Izuku had lost any and all pride in himself. When the man dragged him into the station, he almost cried to have all of his role models see him humiliated like this. Kondo rose from behind the desk, dwarfed by the man but matching him in spirit. Just what are you doing to the boy, sir? This boy is obviously passing as a police officer, the man said. I'm sure you understand the gravity of his actions. I'm sure you want to let go of Officer Midoriya before I tase you for assaulting an officer, Saito spat, fury blazing in her eyes. At that the crushing grip finally relented, and Izuku flexed his fingers as feeling returned to them. Once he stepped away from the man, recognition finally dawned on him. Oh, you're Sir Night-Eye, All Might's previous sidekick. I would say it's a pleasure to meet you, but Detective Tsukauchi is expecting me. I am actually here to speak with the detective as well, and I'm short on time. My apologies for the whole situation, but do you have an appointment? Kondo asked. No, but the matter is urgent. You'll wait, Nakamura commanded. Midoriya has important police business. You may be a hero, but our work doesn't pause or wait for you. If you would let us know when you're coming, we could accommodate your schedule. As it stands, the detective is in an important conference call and is currently unable to speak to either of you. Sansa idled up to Izuku, looking regretful. I hate to ask this of you, but it's been a hectic morning, Midoriya. Can you take Sir Night-Eye to the waiting room and see that he stays there? If he stays in here too much longer, Saito might punch him in the face, and we don't need to fill out paperwork explaining why it happened again. Izuku nodded. Yeah, I can do that, Sansa. Do we have any coffee to offer him? Mori brewed it today, I would be hesitant. Note taken. No coffee unless I decide to enact vigilante justice and poison the man, Izuku said with a small smile. Remember Midoriya, you earned your spot here. You are a fully capable and certified police officer, and you deserve to be recognized as such. That means that you work adjacent to heroes, even Sir Night-Eye. Hold your head up and be rightfully proud of what you've accomplished. A real smile found its way to Izuku's face as he looked up at the cat officer. Thanks, Sansa. You're the best. Thanks for helping me put out a few fires, Officer Midoriya, Sansa said, ruffling Izuku's hair. Hearing those words made Izuku feel the same excitement he'd woken up with that morning. He could handle Sir Night-Eye for a few minutes for the sake of the station and Saito's career. Izuku came into the room at exactly the right time, interrupting a heated debate between Sir Night-Eye and Saito. The officer looked about to strangle the hero, and Nakamura was doing his best to restrain his partner, hissing, "He's not worth it. Who's going to prank Kimura when she's back if you're in jail?" Sir Night-Eye, I'll show you to our waiting room while the detective is still busy with this call, Izuku said, in his approximation of a customer service voice. At least, he'd been told that working with the general public the way that police officers and EMTs do is not dissimilar to working in retail or food service. Often you have to deal with the worst in people. The man wordlessly followed, eyes bright and analytical. So tell me, how did you come to be an officer at such a young age? Well, it was just this year that the police force started the provisional police program, and I was the first participant. It hasn't been well publicized because I want to operate like the rest of the police force, kind of working in the shadow of the heroes so I can help people more effectively. We can't all be All Might, after all, Izuku said with a bitter smile. Would you like some tea? No, indeed we can't all be All Might. Yes on the tea, though. Sir Night Eye said, staring at Izuku with an intensity that made him shift in his seat. How did you come to be the first participant in this program? Why would they choose you? And why did you choose to become a police officer in the first place? Well, I originally wanted to be a hero, Izuku said, trying not to wither under the man's gaze, but I'm quirkless, and I've been informed by several reliable sources that that isn't an option. I would probably have to say that Detective Tsukauchi noticed me the same time I realized I wanted to become a police officer. There was a little girl who had been kidnapped named Kimiko. He told the story as quickly as possible, ending with, and that's how I got to be noticed by Detective Tsukauchi. Sir stared at the boy like he was trying to figure something out when it finally clicked into place. You were the boy that took down Stain, weren't you? Yes. Izuku said, fiddling with something he had pulled from his pocket. He didn't know how to react to Sir Night Eye. The hero was unpredictable. You've already had a fairly illustrious career. I must commend. Must you insist on playing with that? What is that? Sorry, Izuku squeaked, holding the object up for scrutiny. I do this when I get nervous sometimes. It stops me from muttering. It's a Chinese finger trap. I always have one handy after I incapacitated Shigaraki with one a while ago. The hero choked on his tea. You did what? Are you talking about Shigaraki Tamura, leader of the League of Villains? Yes. Izuku squeaked again, the pitch even higher this time. I was at the mall with some friends, and he was there and threatened to kill a lot of people, but I had just gotten these at a joke shop and his quirk is activated through touching something with all 5 of his fingers, so I just... Izuku had to forcibly clamp his mouth shut, ending the deluge of information, terrified to meet the eyes of the hero that was just staring at him. He'd royally screwed things up this time. Now Sir Night Eye would probably begin proclaiming to the masses that the police force was incapable, that they should have never begun the provisional police program to begin with. After a few moments of staring at the currently panicking police officer, Sir Night Eye laughed. It was a hearty laugh from the belly, and he was in no hurry to stop laughing. Izuku was petrified as he watched the man laugh enough to bring tears to his eyes. Between guffaws, Sir asked, How did you get the finger traps on him? He was trying to get me to join him and gesturing kind of wildly, so I just slipped it on. And then a second one so he couldn't disintegrate the first one. This only brought more laughter, which was only interrupted by an alarmed Sansa stepping into the room. Is everything okay in here, Midoriya? I think so. The other officer surreptitiously glanced at the hero, whose laughter was only now dying down. Well, the detective is ready to see you, Midoriya. Shortly afterwards he'll talk with you, Sir Night Eye. Izuku rose, glad for the opportunity to escape. Thanks, Sansa. Once in the familiar office, he immediately felt calmer. Detective Tsukauchi looked up from his paperwork, already smiling. Welcome to your first day on the force, Officer Midoriya. With that single sentence, Izuku felt the excitement that had kept him up all night return in full force. Reporting for duty, Detective Tsukauchi. Sit down, we need to discuss the plan. Obviously, right now you are a rookie, but your training was a bit unconventional. There are areas that you're knowledgeable and skilled in already that usually takes years to gain proficiency, but at the same time, there were things in your training that were forgotten or put off, so we have some things to take care of. First order of business, this. Opening a drawer, the detective carefully laid a holstered handgun onto the desk. This is yours once Sansa trains you well enough that we're sure you won't shoot your foot off, or anything or anyone you don't mean to. We also have this for you. The next item to be added to the table was a belt with a multitude of compartments. While the fanny pack is great for when you're off duty, we do have a certain dress standard that's expected of us. This was the more professional option. Saito is still trying to come up with a name for the belt. Please don't encourage her. It has all the standard police equipment, with a few empty compartments for you to do whatever you deem necessary with. A small smile spread over Izuku's face, his hands already itching to see what equipment they had found for him this time. We also wanted your opinion on something, Detective Tsukauchi continued. Izuku's eyes snapped to the detective's face. Yes? Your situation is unusual. We both know this, Tsukauchi said slowly. Publicly, the only thing you've done is defeat Stain. You're young, and very few people take notice of their local police officers. We have a unique opportunity for you to consistently go on undercover missions without jeopardizing your cover. Are you serious? Izuku asked excitedly. We need to talk it over with your mother, obviously, but Tsuramage and I were discussing the benefits of having you develop an underground persona. This might not be for a few years, but we think you would be the perfect person for the job. And if you're going to make an impact, you need to be remembered. Rolling his chair back, Detective Tsukauchi produced a long, sleek katana that was all too familiar to Izuku. Tsuramage has decided that this would be a sort of proof of your legitimacy. You will not touch this until you have trained extensively with Valiant and he okays you using it. If you get hurt by this sword again, I swear I will have it melted down and made into a helmet for you. Is that Stain's sword? I get Stain's sword? Izuku asked reverently, ignoring the reminder of Izuku's last interaction with this particular sword. It wasn't my idea at all, but yes, Midoriya, you get Stain's sword, Tsukauchi said, looking exhausted at the thought. Take this and go find Sansa, your firearm training starts today. Naomasa watched Izuku scurry from the room clutching the gun with far too much enthusiasm. He had the utmost respect for the boy, and he was extremely grateful for the day that he had wandered into Naomasa's admittedly dull life. But as much as he saw the boy's potential, he worried for Izuku's well-being. He would just have to hope that they had trained Izuku well enough. His office door opening pulled Naomasa from such thoughts, and he found himself meeting eyes with a person he hadn't seen for quite a while. Sir Night-Eye, it's been a while. Where did you find Midoriya? He's one of the singularly most remarkable children I've ever met, Sir said, taking a seat. Midoriya found us, Naomasa said a bit hesitantly. How can I help you, Sir Night-Eye? On to business, I suppose. You may have already caught wind of this, Tsukauchi, but I'm currently leading the efforts against a specific sect of the Yakuza, a sect led by a man named Overhaul, Night-Eye said. I've come to enlist your help. I assume Toshinori isn't among your force, the detective speculated. I'm willing to hear you out, but I need more information than that. How much information do you have? What exactly do you need from me? This was my initial plan, Sir said, sliding a folder of papers to Naomasa. Look over them as you will, it's got all of the details and facts that I have. I initially wanted to simply request you and a handful of your officers for reinforcements, but my request has changed a bit. At those words, Detective Tsukauchi had to resist reaching for the bottle of antacids in his desk drawer. He could feel the ulcer already. And how has your request changed? I want Midoriya undercover. A heartbeat passes with the two men staring one another down, until Tsukauchi firmly said, no. Hear me out, if we had Midoriya. He's 15, I said no. I'm not sending him into the heart of the Yakuza as his first mission. He's the same age as the hero students we consistently put into danger, Sir Night-Eye argued. I haven't looked into what the results would be with Midoriya on our side, but I can feel it in my bones that he's a vital piece of this. Naomasa clenched his hands into fists under his desk, refraining from speaking for a few moments. Tell me how Midoriya would modify your plans. I will think about it, and after discussing with him and his mother, I will give you my answer. Excerpts from Izuku's analysis. Name: Soma Yukio. Age: 59. Height: 183 centimeters, 6. Occupation: police officer, partners with Mori. Physical description: Officer Soma is exactly what you picture when you think of a kindly grandfather. He has salt and pepper hair, although it is admittedly more white than black anymore. His body is in great shape for his age, even though he may have a bit of a belly from his wife's cooking. Personality: Soma is very kind and calm. He's always willing to lend a hand, though he's not afraid to reprimand people when it is absolutely necessary. This may be why he was paired with Mori. Quirk: Icy gale. Soma can summon, not generate, cold bursts of wind. The limit to his quirk seems less to have to do with how strong the gusts of wind are, and more with the temperature of the wind. More tests to follow. Notes: Soma is known as the station grandpa, but he also loves talking about his grandchildren as well. He will show them off at every opportunity, and bring them to the station whenever there's a hint of a reason. For some reason, he started keeping a picture of me in his wallet along with them. I've attempted to ask him about it, and he just replied, "Well, I have to show you off too," before changing the subject. Chapter 24. Izuku took to police work almost seamlessly. Indeed, it was so easy that the police officers, Tsukauchi in particular, couldn't help but feel suspicious. Things never went this smoothly, especially if Izuku was involved. No one had been injured in the process of his firearm training, or his sword training with Valiant aside from a few bruises. In fact, the boy showed an innate talent for both. This should have comforted Naomasa, but somehow it made things worse. He couldn't forget his conversation with Sir Night-Eye. It haunted him more often than he would like to admit. Sir had petitioned Tsuragame for the aid of Izuku, and they would be hearing back on the decision by week's end. A storm was brewing, and Naomasa prayed Midoriya wouldn't fall victim to it. But the boy deserved to know what was going on, and that was why he ended up calling Midoriya into his office that fateful morning. He smiled at the detective, but Midoriya was clearly apprehensive. "You called for me, detective?" "Sit down, Midoriya. You're not in trouble, I promise. We just have some serious matters to discuss." The boy sagged in relief. "Oh, thank goodness. Mori told me, but of course it isn't true, you would have." "Are you with me, Midoriya?" "Why, yes, sir." "Good," Naomasa said, making a mental note to interrogate Mori later. "Midoriya, how do you feel about becoming an undercover cop?" The boy cocked his head. "It intrigues me, and I am curious about potentially having an underground persona. I think it will help a lot of our investigations once I've had enough training." "Midoriya, you deserve to know this. As of right now, you are the top candidate to go undercover for a mission dealing with the Yakuza. Nothing has been officially decided, but there's a high possibility you'll be asked to do this. Talk it over with your mother. By no means do you have to say yes, you have a few weeks, if not a month before you'll have to make a decision. I just want you to have time to think it over." Izuku was stunned. Why would they choose me? I'm just a rookie. You've impressed the hero leading the whole operation. Besides, you would be perfect for this particular job for a variety of reasons. Legally, I can't go into those details until you're formally being informed of the job, though, Tsukauchi said. "I understand." Naomasa took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair. "So tell me, Midoriya, how are things going? We haven't had the chance to." Before Tsukauchi could finish his statement, Nakamura burst into the room, breathless. The officer cut off the detective's protest with, "I'm sorry, sir, but we have a code 303. A 303? Who would bring a—" "No, sir, not that 303. You know," Nakamura said, staring at Tsukauchi intently, "a 303. The detective paled visibly over a matter of seconds. "Nakamura, hold her off as long as possible. Midoriya, Hide under my desk and no matter what happens, don't come out until I give you the all clear. What? Why? Izuku protested while Nakamura scurried away. There's no time. I promise I'll explain later, Tsukauchi said, dragging Izuku behind his desk. But get down and stay quiet. You'll understand later, Tsukauchi said frantically. Just stay quiet. Confused, Izuku did sink down to the ground, hugging his knees to his chest as he burrowed underneath the desk. He waited with bated breath, and before too long the door opened. Naomasa. A syrupy voice gushed. Even without seeing the speaker, Izuku could sense the layers of calculation in her voice. How's my favorite big brother? I'm at work, Makoto. Today especially I don't have time to answer your questions. If you want to talk to me, then you'll have to see me after work, Tsukauchi said in the flattest voice Izuku had ever heard from the man. And then you'll tell me what it's like having your good friend All Might in the same city as you? She said, her voice even sweeter than before. It was almost sweet enough to make Izuku nauseous. You know what my answer will be, Tsukauchi said a bit coldly. Now go, I have important work to do. Fine. I can always interview your little offices. I'm sure they've had some interesting cases lately, the girl said airily. Besides, Saito always has something fun to tell me about you and what's going on at the station. They also have work. Why are you even in Musutafu? Weren't you just telling me how much they need you at work in Tokyo? My boss thought I was the right person to interview All Might and some of his students. Isn't that such a great career opportunity? Then why are you here instead of interviewing them? Tsukauchi asked. Well, we didn't exactly secure an interview with him, that's part of the job. But since my big brother knows All Might so. No. Naomasa, I don't think you heard me. I said. No, Makoto. You know that I cannot and will not disclose anything about this. And trying to throw my name around won't help a thing, so don't even try. If you get an interview with All Might, it will be through your efforts, the detective said firmly. Izuku's legs were getting cramped under the desk. He couldn't help but be curious about this Makoto, apparently the detective's sister. But based on Tsukauchi's reaction, he couldn't help but feel a healthy fear for her as well. She seemed truly formidable. He hadn't even met the woman, but the thought of her combining forces with Saito and Sasaki was enough to make him feel nauseous. Or maybe he was nauseous from all the talk of All Might. Was the detective friends with the hero? It would make sense. Tsukauchi did get put on a lot of high-profile cases. He was bound to have worked with the hero a time or two. Besides, he had listened to All Might. He had gone into law enforcement. That knowledge didn't dispel the slight bitterness he felt towards the hero, or the fear that this dream would also be crushed. But Naomasa. We both have work, Makoto. If you start asking now, you might be able to get an interview with him by the end of summer. The woman huffed. Fine. Be a stick in the mud as per usual, Naomasa. By the way, I'm crashing at your place this week. As soon as the door closed behind his sister, the detective sprang into action. He pulled Izuku to his feet, wincing sympathetically when the boy hissed from the feeling returning to his legs that had been asleep. I'm sorry, Midoriya. I swear I will explain everything later, but for now I need you to. The door burst open, cutting off Tsukauchi. I knew it. You were talking to All Might, or your secret lover, or, Makoto broke off, her eyes zeroing in on Izuku. Who is this? Naomasa? Your secret love child? You're going to break Mom's heart. I'm not. No, Makoto. No. Well, someone better start explaining why we have a junior officer in here that's just as plain looking as my dear brother, Makoto said, crossing her arms. How old are you, kid? 12? You may look cute playing dress up, but you're not going to get many girls like that. I'm almost 16. Izuku squawked indignantly. Midoriya is our newest police officer via the new provisional police program. And no, you can't interview him. Izuku found himself being scrutinized intensely by the girl's green eyes. A police officer at 12 years old, interesting. She stared at him a bit longer before blurting, I need him. What? No. Makoto batted her eyelashes. This would have made the news if you had wanted it to be public knowledge. I can always make it public knowledge. I can always arrest you. You know you wouldn't, Naomasa. Hear me out. You let Midoriya come with me to request an interview with All Might and a few of his students. I stay out of your hair. Midoriya makes sure I don't do anything illegal, and I get to know my secret nephew, Makoto wheedled. Come on, it's a win for everyone. Makoto. She placed her hands on his desk, eyes boring into his. Just think of all the things I could get into and investigate without supervision. Silence hung in the air, taut between the siblings. A few tense moments passed before Detective Tsukauchi sighed, a long, weary sigh. Midoriya, you'll be accompanying my sister from today until she leaves the city. I would suggest going plainclothes, take the fanny pack. Don't let her do anything illegal, and don't let her corrupt you. Ah, I knew you cared. Makoto gushed. If you corrupt that child, I'm going to tell Mom about the incident, Tsukauchi threatened. Opening one of the desk drawers, he offered Izuku a pair of handcuffs. Midoriya, if she doesn't listen to you, feel free to arrest her. I love you too, Naomasa, Makoto said, blowing a kiss. I'll wait in the lobby for you, nephew. I'm not, and she's gone. Detective? What just happened? Izuku asked. She played me to get what she wants, just like she always does. I just hope she doesn't introduce you to her college friends. There's something about them I just don't trust. Be careful, Midoriya, and vigilant. But also enjoy yourself. You might even get to meet All Might. Izuku paled at the thought, but managed to keep a smile on his face. We'll just have to see what happens, I guess. His mind raced as he walked to the locker room, mechanically changing into the spare set of clothes he kept at the station. He shrugged on the t-shirt that read polo shirt and a pair of cargo shorts. He hoped that Makoto was more tolerant of his fashion than the female officers were. Saito often threatened to overhaul his entire wardrobe. But any thoughts like this were mainly to drown out the sheer panic at the thought of meeting All Might again. It would be fine. Once Makoto secured her interview with the man, he could escape. Maybe Ojiro or Shinso would have free time. He hadn't gotten to see much of either boy since UA decided to implement the dorm system. He would just have to take care to avoid Kachan, but at this point Izuku was almost a master at that. But All Might. The thought of the hero did make Izuku a bit nauseous, and he felt the absurd need to hide from the man. It was ridiculous, really. Even his bitterness towards the man was fading as his life was consumed with police work. He had found the place that he belonged. But Izuku felt the absurd need to stay away from the hero until he had proven himself and become the youngest detective in history. Avoiding All Might would just have to be the plan for now. If the students were busy, Izuku was sure Nezu would let him camp out in his office without asking too many questions. Maybe he could even catch a nap in Aizawa's sleeping bag. Scratch that, Izuku valued his life. If all else failed, UA was bound to have a broom closet to sequester himself in. Whatever happens, happens, Izuku told himself as he buckled the fanny pack. The familiar weight was comforting, and he found that he was able to breathe normally again. Everything would work out one way or another. No fair, little Midoriya gets to accompany you. I have to do paperwork. Saito complained. If you don't do your paperwork, you'll be as bad as the station that let Midoriya get kidnapped, Sansa said, warning in his voice. Besides, Kimura will be back any day now. Do you really want to explain to her why you haven't finished your paperwork? That's low, Saito said, but it clearly worked, based on the way she attacked the stack of papers with vigor. We're off to interview heroes. Makoto said, saluting the room full of officers. I'll bring the kid back before curfew. Don't let him get hurt, please, Nakamura said in passing, carrying a crate full of files. Your brother will kill you. I'll be fine, Nakamura. I promise. But we should probably leave soon, Izuku said, subtly nudging her toward the door. Good point. I want to interview everyone I can. I'll see you all later. Upon exiting the station, they walked the first few blocks in silence. Izuku found himself fiddling with the zippers of the fanny pack, unsure of what to do or say. He hadn't felt this awkward for a while, and he wasn't quite sure what to do about it. He was caught off guard by the woman seizing his forearm. Be real with me, kid. Are you my nephew? You actually thought that? Izuku squeaked. He blushed, and clearing his throat, he continued in a deeper voice, No, Detective Tsukauchi is just someone I admire a lot. She withdrew her hands, looking disappointed. I figured Naomasa was too straight-laced to have a secret love child, but I kind of hoped, never mind, it's not your problem, kid. They walked on in a heavy silence until Izuku said, The first time I met him, the detective seemed a bit lonely. I was worried about him. Naomasa wasn't built to be alone, Makoto said sadly. He takes everything so seriously, and he needs someone to take care of him. I wouldn't say that, Izuku countered. I see where you're coming from, but since I've gotten to know him, I've seen firsthand that the station is just as much the detective's family as it is mine. One day he'll find someone to share his life with, but in the meantime you don't need to worry, we'll take care of your brother. We all care about him, even Mori, believe it or not. Makoto stared at him for a few moments before smiling. I don't need my quirk to know that you actually mean that. I'm going to hold you to that, kid. I can see why Naomasa likes you so much. Maybe we'll work on a story together one day. Izuku glanced at her from the side. You're a journalist, aren't you? What kind of journalism do you usually do? Investigative journalist is my title, but my work usually centers on heroes. So you're good at uncovering information about heroes, right? Makoto gave him a sly look. I have a feeling I'm going to like you. From the way you're talking, it sounds like we're going to be doing something my brother is going to hate. Izuku bit his lip, seriously debating with himself. You can keep a secret, right? Little Midoriya, while I enjoy getting published, I live for finding answers. A fierce debate was raging through Izuku's mind. Could he trust Makoto? He didn't get any suspicious vibes from her, just ambitious ones. Besides, he didn't know if an opportunity like this would ever present itself again. Closing his eyes, he asked, How much do you know about Endeavor? Excerpts from Izuku's analysis. Name: Kimura Yuki. Age: 28. Height: 182 centimeters, 6 feet 11.5 inches, 2 centimeters taller than Mori. Occupation: police detective. Physical description: Kimura has long, straight blue-black hair and ice blue eyes. She is tall and slim, and I definitely did not write that because she almost killed Mori for commenting about the baby weight she hasn't lost yet. Personality: Detective Kimura has a wicked sense of humor. She will start a prank war at the tip of a hat, especially if Saito is involved in any way. Tsukauchi and her husband are the only known means of keeping her in check. However, Kimura is one of the most gifted homicide detectives in the entire country. She takes her job seriously and loves her family dearly. Quirk: Medusa stare. While looking at a person, Kimura can induce partial or full body paralysis, although, much like a Eraserhead, the effect stops when Kimura blinks. Kimura, however, does not suffer from dry eye, nor do her eyes change color while her quirk is being used. She seems to have a limit of using it for roughly 10 minutes a day. Notes: Kimura is getting back from maternity leave next week, and from the stories I've heard, she's someone to watch out for. I just need to find a way to get on her good side. I kind of know her at this point from the few times she's stopped into the station, but it usually ended abruptly via her husband dragging her away, telling her she was on leave. I hesitantly look forward to getting to know Kimura better. I just have to avoid coming between her and Saito for any reason. Chapter 25. The gates of UA were somehow more intimidating than normal. They loomed over Izuku, and he couldn't help but feel uneasy. This was his first time being at the school while class was being held. All Might and Kachan were waiting for him somewhere in here. He did his best to regulate his breathing. It would be fine. He had faced Stain and the League of Villains. This was supposed to be a school for heroes. Someone would stop Kachan from killing him. Hopefully. His hand slightly shook as he buzzed the intercom. Yes? He cleared his throat. It's Midoriya Izuku with a guest. I'd like to speak to Principal Nezu, please. You know the way, the voice crackled before the gates swung open. Gesturing for Makoto to follow, Izuku led the way through the behemoth campus. The walk to Nezu's office was short, but Makoto watched everything with frighteningly perceptive eyes. He could sense articles upon articles resulting from that, an insider look into UA and the like. Nezu was in his office waiting with a serene smile. For some reason, Makoto seemed uneasy. Izuku only smiled brightly at the bear. Mouse? Dog? He smiled at the principal. Officer Midoriya, to what do I owe the pleasure? Good morning, Principal Nezu. I'm actually not here on my own business. I'm accompanying Tsukauchi Makoto. She's a reporter with a favor to ask. Oh? Nezu asked, eyes unreadable as they slid to the woman. Even though Makoto seemed uneasy, she stepped forward boldly. As Midoriya said, I'm Tsukauchi Makoto, a reporter for the Tokyo Times. It's a pleasure to meet you. Likewise. What brings you to our school, Ms. Tsukauchi, with a police escort no less? I've been assigned to get an interview with All Might and some of his students, Makoto said bluntly. To be perfectly frank, Principal Nezu, I will not be leaving until I get it. Nezu's eyes sparkled, and from their chats Izuku knew that Makoto was playing a dangerous game. While Izuku would go as far as to call himself and Nezu friends, he knew never to challenge Nezu. Officer Midoriya, feel free to explore the campus. I believe Eraserhead just released his class until lunch to do research on an upcoming project. I believe a good portion of them are in the library. You can leave Ms. Tsukauchi and me to our negotiations. Is that okay with you, Ms. Tsukauchi? Izuku asked. Go. We're about to have a battle of wits. Glad to somewhat decrease his chance of crossing paths with All Might, Izuku nodded at the two before stepping out the door. As he walked, he thought of the conversation he had had with Makoto on the way over here. He wasn't sure how to handle the whole situation. Todoroki deserved to be saved from his father, he needed to be able to be a kid. But, even with as much as he despised Endeavor, Izuku just couldn't destroy the man. As the number 2 hero, if Endeavor was exposed, then the entire foundation of their heroic society would take a hit, and chaos would abound. While the whole society was problematic in a plethora of ways, right now, no one was really prepared to offer an alternative. His own prejudices aside, Izuku could see why All Might had worked so hard to establish himself as the symbol of peace. Statistically, it was effective. It significantly lowered crime rates, but it also fed into the somewhat toxic heroic culture. This was why he couldn't bring the detective in on this. Tsukauchi would be legally and honor bound to go through the proper channels, which would only cause mass chaos. On the other hand, Makoto had no such reservations and a knack for sniffing out information, if her articles he'd briefly looked at were any indication. He just needed to swear her to secrecy if things worked out the way he hoped they would. He had to halt this line of thinking as he approached the library. Izuku doubted that Kachan would be there. There were likely too many extras in there for his taste. He was most likely holed up in his room doing what research he could on his laptop until he could go to the library when it was more empty. Even with that reasoning, Izuku found himself hesitating before the library door. He debated heavily with himself. Since he'd begun working and the UA students had moved to dorms, he hadn't been able to see Ojiro or Shinso for quite some time, and he missed his friends. It would also be nice to see Iida if he could, and he couldn't deny a small longing to see Uraraka. Izuku spent more time thinking of the brunette than he cared to admit. As expected of UA, the library was vast. A part of him wanted to go examine the books. Maybe he could ask Nezu's permission later. Before he could get very far into the library, however, a familiar voice stopped him. "Hey there, listener, are you lost?" Izuku turned to blink at the voice hero present Mike, a man he only knew from his radio show and an inordinately large amount of internet stalking, completely for analysis purposes, of course. "Why Izuku stuttered, physically forcing himself not to stutter. The pro-hero feigned an ignorant, friendly persona, but Izuku felt the man's calculating gaze keenly. Izuku halfway wished Tsukauchi had let him wear his uniform, then he would have looked at least slightly credible instead of a trash gremlin. Sometimes he wanted to curse the amount of overly perceptive people in his life. If his analysis was accurate, present Mike was very smart. And waiting for an answer. Izuku coughed, mentally shaking himself. "Sorry about that, I've just been a fan for a long time. I'm Officer Midoriya. I'm currently escorting someone who's in a meeting with Principal Nezu at the moment. I was given his permission to be here while they negotiate," Izuku said, fumbling to pull out his badge. Present Mike visibly relaxed, his smile growing in excitement. "You're Shota's kid. And Tsukauchi's. Whenever they get the chance, they both brag about you like you would not believe. I've wanted to meet you for a while, just call me Yamada." "And nice to meet you," Izuku said, trying his best not to look starstruck as he shook the man's hand. "I've got a meeting to go to, but I'd love to chat with you sometime, Midoriya." "Good luck with the person you're escorting," Mike said, waving. The whole encounter felt a little surreal. Izuku made it into the library feeling a little dazed, but he was almost immediately greeted by a familiar face. Ojiro. Head snapping up, the blonde smiled at Izuku. "Midoriya, what are you doing here?" "I'm acting as police escort right now. My charge is meeting with Nezu." "Police escort?" asked Hagakure, startling Izuku, though he did his best not to show it. She was sitting behind a pile of books, so Izuku hadn't noticed her. "Maybe he should analyze her next. I thought you were an EMT?" She continued. "I'm actually a certified field medic, not," Izuku said, running a hand through his hair, "but that's kind of a side thing I do. I've recently finished the certifications to become a police officer." "Impressive," said a nearby girl. "Congratulations, Midoriya. I don't believe we've officially met. I'm Yaoyorozu Momo. It's nice to see you all again. So what are you working on?" "We're supposed to be coming up with ultimate moves," Ojiro said. "What I've come up with so far just isn't cutting it." Izuku tapped the table. "How much of your body weight can your tail support without straining it?" "All of it. It's just uncomfortable because physiologically my tail isn't meant to be used that way." The tapping grew faster, the staccato percussion matching the speed of Izuku's thoughts. "Okay, hear me out." He ended up helping each of them, setting them onto previously unconsidered paths. As he was talking over a multitude of options over with Yaoyorozu, a few other students wandered over. Izuku didn't mind. He'd want to gauge his rapid analysis skills for a while. Their lunch period was impending when a voice utterly demolished his concentration. "Midoriya, what are you doing here?" Freezing, Izuku almost didn't want to turn around. Suddenly he felt kind of queasy and his heart was racing. Sure enough, when he turned around he found Uraraka bouncing toward him with Iida furiously whispering that it was unsafe to run in libraries as he followed. Somehow swallowing was incredibly difficult. Hi, Uraraka, Iida. "Uraraka, you know running is not permitted outside of training areas," Iida scolded, his arms chopping the air. Lighten up, Iida, Midoriya's here. The girl exclaimed. It is nice to see you again, Midoriya. Congratulations on being inducted as an officer, as well. Uraraka and I wished to be at the ceremony, but my parents were busy that day, and as such I looked after my brother's well-being. Uraraka kindly offered to help me ensure that Tensai only has the best care, Iida said, tearing up a bit. He was in perfectly good shape, Uraraka stage whispered to Izuku. I think Iida's parents mainly wanted him to check in on Tensai. He's actually gotten really good in his wheelchair. We raced around the house when Tenya wasn't looking. It was even more fun when I used my quirk on Tensai. Which is completely inappropriate outside of training grounds, Iida said severely. Anyway, what are you doing here, Midoriya? And in such casual clothes as well. I'm acting as a police escort right now, but I'm in plainclothes so I don't draw attention to myself, Izuku explained. My charge is with your principal right now, so Nezu told me I could come here. Actually, while you're all here, can I ask you all a favor? It was perfect. Makoto wanted between 3 and 5 students to interview from the hero course, and these 5 had been largely overlooked in the sports festival. Their voices would be a new facet of the narrative, and Izuku explained as much to the group. They all agreed, and Izuku was warmed by it. For whatever reason, he knew those 5 needed this opportunity. Their lunch period rolled around, and students began filing out of the library. That was his cue to go see how negotiations were going between Nezu and Makoto, but he couldn't stop himself from glancing at Uraraka. He felt nervous and excited and guilty, and he didn't know when he would be able to see her again. As she packed up to go, Izuku couldn't stop himself from tapping her shoulder. Uraraka, could I talk to you for a minute? Sure. The library was empty after Iida promised to save her a seat in the cafeteria. More specifically, it was empty aside from Uraraka, Izuku, and his pounding heart. What did you need, Midoriya? Just her voice made Izuku's emotions intensify. He knew his face was bright red when he stammered, would you be willing to go out for boba tea with me tonight? Uraraka blinked a few times before blushing wildly herself. What? There was something I wanted to talk to you about in private, but you have to get to lunch, and I'm still technically on the clock, but I get off soon after you're done with school, so I thought. Oh, you don't have to explain yourself, Uraraka said, waving her hands frantically as her cheeks darkened. I was just caught off guard, that's all. And I would love to go get boba tea with you. Oh, okay. I'll see you then, Izuku said, faltering a bit. Have a nice day. With that, he bowed deeply before scurrying away. As he put distance between himself and Uraraka, Izuku couldn't repress his muttering, this time mostly berating himself for the atrocity of whatever that had just been. Did I seriously just bow? I may as well have shook her hand and offered her some candy, Izuku fretted, drumming his fingers on his thigh. He was so focused on his own stupidity that he didn't see the other person in the hallway until he'd walked directly into them, spilling a mass of papers all over the floor. Sorry, Izuku said, immediately falling to his knees to begin collecting papers. Oh, thank you, my boy, said a deep voice. I suppose I wasn't watching where I was going. Izuku swallowed thickly before looking up into the face of All Might. The man was in his smaller form, his true form, apparently, and Izuku's blood felt frozen in his veins. He was unable to move, rooted in place for a few, painfully long moments. But by the grace of some higher power, he mumbled, I'm sorry, it was my fault. Something shifted in All Might's eyes, sympathy, recognition, Izuku wasn't sure. Are you? Sorry again, I've got a meeting, Izuku blurted, thrusting the papers into the man's hands before practically sprinting down the hallway. Iida would be horrified, but Izuku couldn't find it in himself to care. When he got to Nezu's office, he was distracted by his panic when he was almost taken out by the door flying open. An overly excited Makoto appeared, grabbing Izuku by the shoulders and shaking him wildly. You're a miracle worker, Midoriya. I'm taking you out for lunch as a thank you. Feeling like he was dangerously close to a concussion, Izuku grabbed her forearms, halting the woman. What are you talking about? I have an interview with All Might on Friday. No one ever gets them on such short notice. And it's because of you. Why didn't you tell me you knew most of the staff here already? Makoto asked, cocking her head at him. It didn't seem relevant? Izuku squeaked. It didn't seem relevant? She echoed, disbelief. Kid, I don't know who all you know, but you've got connections. My brother is one of those, but you are known and liked by Nezu himself. Nezu never actually likes anyone, he just enjoys manipulating people. I don't care if you're actually my brother's kid, I'm now your adoptive aunt, it's official. Izuku spluttered as she slung an arm over his shoulders. Desperate to change the subject. Izuku said, I have a list of students that agreed to being interviewed. Seeing the list, Makoto's smile impossibly grew. Interesting, I can make this work. Where do you want to go for lunch? Biting his lip, Izuku referred her to one of his favorite restaurants within walking distance. Once they were on their way on a sparsely populated road, she leveled him with a glance. Okay, tell me the scoop, Midoriya. What do you know about Endeavor? First, I need you to promise that you'll keep all of this a secret unless I either give you the okay to go public, or I die in a suspicious arson case, Izuku said adamantly. Now I'm even more intrigued. You have my word, Midoriya. I may be a hungry young reporter, but I know we can't just go around defaming top heroes. Okay, now I've had some suspicions for a while.